Two people are having a serious conversation about you. The stars know why. It's not what you think. A conversation is happening somewhere right now, and your name has found its way into it. Not because of something loud you did, not because you demanded attention, but because there is something about your presence that lingers in people's minds long after you leave. Before you assume you know what this conversation is about, stay with this. The truth is far more meaningful than the stories you may have already told yourself. Two people are sitting across from each other, and in a way that neither fully understands, they keep returning to the subject of you. One speaks about something they noticed, the other adds something they felt. What makes this unusual is that they are not discussing a mistake you made, a problem you caused, or a dramatic event. They are trying to understand a change they have seen unfolding quietly over time. They have watched you carry things without announcing them. They have noticed how you continue moving forward even when nobody is standing beside you. The conversation is less about what you have done and more about who you have become. That is why it feels different. That is why it keeps happening. There are moments in life when growth is so gradual that you cannot see it yourself. You wake up every day with the same thoughts, the same responsibilities, and the same questions. Because you are living inside your own story, you rarely notice how much has shifted. Yet people standing outside the frame often see what you cannot. They notice the patience that was not there before. They notice the way you handle disappointment with greater wisdom. They notice that certain things no longer disturb you the way they once did. There is something important here. The stars, if they could speak, would not point toward a future event or a dramatic revelation. They would simply remind you that transformation often becomes visible to others before it becomes visible to yourself. What neither of those people fully realizes is that their conversation is connected to a much larger pattern. Every person carries an energy created by their experiences, choices, and silent lessons. Yours has been changing. Not in a sudden or dramatic way, but in a steady, meaningful one. Somewhere deep inside, parts of you that once searched desperately for answers have started learning how to trust the process of becoming. That quiet shift creates a ripple. People feel it even when they cannot explain it. And as this conversation continues, something unexpected begins to emerge. They are not only talking about who you are now, they are beginning to remember who you used to be, and the contrast between those two versions is about to reveal something neither of them expected. There is a strange moment that happens when someone suddenly realizes they have been witnessing a story without understanding it. That is exactly where this conversation begins to deepen. One of these people pauses and says something simple, yet it changes the entire direction of what they are discussing. They mention how different you seem lately, not different in appearance, not different in the way you speak, different in a way that is harder to describe. It is the kind of change that can only be felt, the kind that makes people stop and wonder what happened behind the scenes when nobody was watching. As they continue talking, memories begin to surface. They remember versions of you that carried more uncertainty. They remember moments when you seemed to be searching for something you could not quite name. Yet when they think about you now, they notice a quieter confidence. It is not loud enough to demand attention, but it is strong enough to change the atmosphere around you. What fascinates them is that this growth did not arrive through a dramatic announcement. There was no single day when everything changed. Instead, it happened through hundreds of unseen moments, small decisions, private realizations, silent acts of courage, the kind of growth that rarely receives applause but transforms a person from the inside out. One of them wonders whether you even know how much you have evolved. The other laughs softly and suggests that you probably do not. And perhaps they are right. Human beings often underestimate their own progress because they are focused on what remains unfinished. You may still see the goals you have not reached, the questions you have not answered, and the dreams that have not fully arrived. But those looking from the outside can see something else. They see the distance you have already traveled. They see how challenges that once would have stopped you now simply become part of the path. Don't miss what comes next, because this is where the conversation becomes surprisingly personal. The more they reflect on your journey, the more they realize that your greatest transformation may not be visible at all. It lives beneath the surface. It shows up in the way you recover after disappointment. It appears in the patience you have developed while waiting for things to make sense. It exists in the quiet understanding that not every answer arrives immediately. The stars seem to whisper through this moment, not as predictors of fate, but as reminders that growth leaves traces everywhere. And while these two people continue talking about what they see in you, they are slowly approaching a realization that will surprise even them. Because the quality that keeps bringing your name into the conversation is not your talent, your success, or your circumstances. It is something much deeper, and they are only beginning to recognize it. What happens next is not what either of them expected. After spending so much time talking about your growth, the conversation shifts toward a question that hangs quietly in the air. One of them asks, "What is it about them that stays with people?" For a moment, neither has an answer. They sit with the question because it feels bigger than anything they have discussed so far. Then slowly, piece by piece, they begin to understand. It is not because you are trying to leave an impression. In fact, it may be the opposite. The reason people remember you is because you make them feel something genuine in a world that often feels rushed, distracted, and temporary. The discussion becomes more thoughtful now. They start sharing small observations that seemed insignificant at the time. A conversation where you listened more than you spoke. A moment when you offered kindness without expecting recognition. A situation where you chose understanding over judgment. None of these moments appeared extraordinary when they happened, yet together they created a picture neither person had fully seen before. They realized that your influence is built from small things, quiet things, the kinds of actions that rarely attract attention but remain in people's hearts long afterward. Stay with this, because the meaning behind it reaches further than you might think. As they continue talking, something else becomes clear. They are not only discussing how you affect others. Without realizing it, they are also exploring the effect you have had on yourself. There was a time when you may have looked outward for proof that you mattered. A time when you wondered whether your efforts were being seen or whether your presence made any difference at all. Yet somewhere along the way, a shift began. You started becoming the kind of person who acts from sincerity rather than validation. That change is subtle, but it carries enormous power. People can sense when someone is comfortable being who they truly are. It creates a feeling of trust that cannot be manufactured. By now, the conversation has become surprisingly emotional. Not because they are speaking about dramatic events, but because they are recognizing something rare. They are seeing a person who continued evolving, even during periods when no one was paying attention. The stars seem to reflect this truth in their own quiet way. The brightest changes often happen in darkness, long before anyone notices the light they create. And as these two people continue connecting the pieces, they begin moving toward a realization that neither expected to find when your name first entered the conversation. They are starting to understand that the real story is not about what you have achieved. It is about the person you have become while nobody was keeping score. There comes a point in every meaningful conversation when the facts are no longer enough. What remains are feelings, impressions, and the deeper truths hiding beneath the surface. That is where these two people find themselves now. They have talked about your growth, your presence, and the quiet impact you leave behind. Yet neither can shake the feeling that there is something even more important they have not said out loud. It lingers between their words, like a thought waiting to be recognized. Then one of them finally speaks it. They suggest that perhaps the most remarkable thing about you is not what you have gained, but what you have learned to release. The other person immediately understands. They begin recalling the ways you seem lighter than before, even if your life is not necessarily easier. There is a difference between carrying burdens and being defined by them. Somewhere along the journey, you started letting go of things that no longer belong to you, expectations that weighed heavily on your heart, old disappointments that once demanded all your attention, the endless pressure to become someone else in order to feel worthy. You may not have noticed this shift while it was happening, but people around you have. They see someone who is no longer fighting every moment of life. Instead, they see someone learning how to move with it. The conversation grows quieter, almost reflective. One of them admits that your journey has caused them to think about their own life. That is when they realize something powerful. The reason your name keeps returning to their discussion is not simply because they are observing you. It is because your story reminds them of possibilities within themselves. Human beings are deeply connected in ways they rarely acknowledge. Sometimes another person's growth becomes a mirror. Sometimes witnessing someone's quiet transformation inspires questions that have been waiting inside us for years. There's something important here. The influence you have may extend much further than you realize, not because you intended it to, but because authenticity naturally creates ripples. As the conversation continues, a new understanding begins to settle over both of them. They stop focusing on individual moments and start seeing the larger picture. They recognize that your path has never been about perfection. It has been about becoming more honest with yourself, more patient with your own process, and more willing to trust what cannot yet be fully understood. The stars, in their silent way, seem to echo that realization. Not every important change arrives with certainty. Some arrive through gentle unfolding. And now, as these two people sit with everything they have discovered, they are approaching the heart of the matter. The real reason this conversation keeps happening is about to reveal itself, and it is far more meaningful than either of them imagined when they first spoke your name.